Hi, thank you for watching Digging to China. I'm Dong Xiong. A year ago, Jack Ma, the founder of Alibaba and Ant Group, was the richest man in China. He was known worldwide akin to Amazon's Jeff Bezos, Microsoft's Bill Gates, and Tesla's Elon Musk. Before founding Alibaba, Jack Ma was an English teacher with a modest translation business in China. In 1995, Jack Ma first used the internet to search beer in China. He found nothing, but there was plenty of information about American beer and German beer. Sensing an opportunity, Ma built a Chinese language webpage. Within hours of launch, he was receiving inquiries from around the world. That planted a seed in Ma's mind. Internet is going to change the world and will change China. A few years later, in 1999, Ma gathered 17 friends and acquaintances at his home. They worked hard on a new venture, a website to connect exporters with foreign buyers. Alibaba.com was born and eventually became the dominant tech company in China. In 2000, Jack Ma met with Masayoshi Son, the CEO of Japanese SoftBank. The two men quickly found common ground, and SoftBank committed to investing $20 million in Alibaba Group. This was joined by an additional $5 million from Goldman Sachs. This investment would quickly be Masayoshi's most successful investment, turning $20 million into $60 billion when Alibaba went public in September 2014. In 2003, eBay announced they would enter the Chinese market with an acquisition of a local B2C e-commerce company called EachNet. This action provoked Jack Ma to launch a rival company, later named Taobao. It means searching for treasure. This was the start of one of eBay's biggest failures, and eventually eBay admitted defeat in 2006 and pulled their operations, which left the entire market ready for Taobao's picking. In October 2020, Ma waved a red flag in the faces of financial regulators when he likened China's financial markets to pawn shops during a speech he gave in Shanghai. This was the beginning of the end of Jack Ma. His criticism of China's banking rules prompted the Communist Party regime to take action and clamp down on big tech. The first major strike was against Ant Group's $30 billion IPO. China's President Xi Jinping ordered the regulators to probe Ma's business dealings, and the IPO was shut down. However, his downfall started much earlier. To some extent, his downfall is inevitable. Why? Because CCP changed heart, and this change of heart is inevitable. In the past, CCP viewed technological disruption as a useful tool for China to catch up with the West. Now it has become a threat to the ruling Communist Party. As a result, the rules are being rewritten in China. Mr. Ma failed to foresee what was coming in the horizon. He tuned out warnings for years and continued to behave like an American entrepreneur. He had traveled to Beijing to try to smooth things over. It was too little, too late, officials said. Mr. Ma strayed too far out of his lane. His ambition and outspoken nature would no longer be tolerated in the tightened grip of Mr. Xi and the ruling party. Mr. Ma should have focused on giving back to the party instead of just focusing on his own interests, said a Beijing official in the regulatory push. That meant keeping a lower profile, doing more to support government enterprises, and sharing more company profits with society, Wall Street Journal reported. In the early days of Alibaba, Mr. Ma was warmly received by many senior officials. Former Chinese Premier Wen Jiabao even called himself a serious student of Mr. Ma's. Government officials hailed his work, including Mr. Xi Jinping, who was the top leader of Zhejiang province, where Alibaba is based. Mr. Xi promoted startups in line with Chinese policy at the time. a former Zhejiang official recalled. Xi Jinping encouraged companies like Alibaba to expand because they are good for the country. After Mr. Xi left Zhejiang in 2007 to be Shanghai's top official, he visited Alibaba and asked, "Can you come to Shanghai and help us develop?" State media reported. Born and grew up in China, Jack Ma knew the communist regime feared innovation, and he was cautious and sometimes kept his business plans under wraps. Porter Erisman was Alibaba's vice president from 2000 to 2008 and the author of the book Alibaba's World. He recalled that during a meeting at the company headquarters in 2003, government officials signaled concerns over Mr. Ma's Taobao venture. The unregulated selling things among consumers were unheard of. Sensing the discomfort of officials, Mr. Ma quickly changed the subject and ushered his guests to a company tour. When Alibaba became more successful, Mr. Ma grew bolder. He launched Alipay, the online payment for transaction on Alibaba. This was a direct threat to the dominance of China's state-owned banks. At a 2000 conference, Jack Ma said, "If the banks don't change, we will change the banks." After Xi Jinping became president in 2013, China's free air in the private sector grew thin. There had been deepening conviction within the party leadership that markets and private entrepreneurs, while important to China's rise, are unpredictable and not to be fully trusted. Mr. Xi announced that state-owned enterprises cannot be weakened, but must be strengthened. Jack Ma did not appear to notice the change in Beijing's attitude, because he was on his global ascent. In 2014, Alibaba raised $25 billion in its initial stock sale on the New York Stock Exchange, surpassing Facebook's IPO. Mr. Ma proclaimed it felt good to create discomfort for China's state-owned enterprises. In 2015, during a TV interview in the US, he said, "If someone needs to go to jail for Alipay, let it be me." In September 2015, Xi Jinping paid a state visit to Seattle. He brought with him some high-profile Chinese business executives, including Jack Ma. At a meeting with American executives, including IBM's then CEO Ginni Rometty, each executive was given 3 minutes to speak in front of the Chinese leader. Everyone stuck to their allotted time and the talking points except for Mr. Ma. He talked for over 10 minutes. This was the last time Mr. Ma was invited to speak in front of China's leader in a group setting. In the meantime, Mr. Ma was treated like a celebrity. He was invited by President Barack Obama to a private White House lunch in Washington. He talked about e-commerce with then French President François Hollande at the Élysée Palace in Paris. Early in 2017, Mr. Ma met with then U.S. President-elect Donald Trump. With cameras rolling, the two men walked into the Trump Tower lobby in Manhattan, where Mr. Trump praised his guest as a great entrepreneur. In the same year, the People's Bank of China demanded that banks cut direct links to Alipay and other non-bank payment firms and instead route online payments through a central bank-designed platform. There also were concerns at the central bank that Ant could become too big to rescue in a financial meltdown, according to people familiar with the matter. During a visit last summer to Hefei, a Chinese city northeast of the epicenter of the COVID-19 outbreak, Mr. Ma invited medical workers for a hot pot banquet to show his appreciation. A local media report referred to him as Teacher Ma and said he sang opera for the guests. However, senior leaders were annoyed. Communist regime took credit for China's COVID-19 response, and some officials thought it wasn't Mr. Ma's place to thank frontline workers. The night before Mr. Ma's October speech that criticized regulators, he alerted employees that he planned to lay into authorities. Within hours of the speech, state regulators began compiling reports on Mr. Ma's companies, including how Ant had used digital financial products to encourage excessive borrowing and spending, threatening China's economy. Eventually, Mr. Xi intervened, scrapped Ant's IPO. It appears it is Jack Ma's outlandish and crazy style that spelled his downfall. It is not so. Anyone with Jack Ma's wealth will attract CCP's punishment. Let me explain. China's economy enjoyed a long period of fast growth. The reforms in the early 80s lifted some of the shackles of economic power. Years of productivity explosions coupled with China's steady stream of cheap labor and the lack of environmental protection, China quickly became the world factory. The main stimulants are easy credit for state-owned enterprises and money printing. But the money supply is not infinite, nor is credit. Otherwise, it will lead to hyperinflation and a financial tsunami. Chinese economy is losing steam. Local and central government coffers are quickly depleting. Chinese government is not as wealthy as many think. There is no money, there is no loyalty. Rich Chinese and business tycoons fall prey to CCP. This is the reason behind Xi Jinping's new plans to more assertively promote social equity, as he tries to solidify popular support for continued Communist Party rule. And Jack Ma is the most obvious target. The push is captured by a catchphrase, common prosperity, now appearing everywhere in China, including in public speeches, state-owned media, and schools, even in comments from newly chastened business tycoons like Jack Ma. Common prosperity. Isn't that the textbook definition of communism? Thank you for watching. Please leave a comment and subscribe to my channel. Just click the subscribe button right here. I'll see you again shortly.